Hey friends, welcome once again to another episode of Strange Planet, and it is a far stranger planet than we can possibly imagine. And on this episode, secrets of the Antarctica. Now, if you'd like to get a little deeper into Strange Planet, here's what you do. You just click on the link in the episode notes and you can become a premium subscriber. It's real easy to do. Click on the link, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Right there in the episode notes, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You gain access to commercial-free listening, bonus episodes, as many as 2 per month, produced exclusively for premium subscribers, and you also receive my newsletter, monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. And we're going to talk about, as I say, Secrets of Antarctica, terrific documentary television program produced last year called Secrets of Antarctica, Hidden Truths Under the Ice. And the driving force behind that documentary joins us once again. Good friend of the program, Brad Olsen, is a captivating speaker and author of 10 books, including 3 in his legendary Esoteric Series, Modern Esoteric, Future Esoteric, and Beyond Esoteric. He's an award-winning author, book publisher, event producer. His keynote presentations and interviews have enlightened audiences at Contact in the Desert, Conscious Life Expo, and the Mount Shasta Summer Conference, and dozens of radio and television programs, including Coast to Coast, Ground Zero. He's been with me many, many times, both on Coast and on the podcast, and my former late-night radio program. He's been on Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, Beyond Belief, Book of Secrets, you name it. He's founder and co-producer of the How Weird Street Faire in the SOMA neighborhood of San Francisco. He's a Chicago native, and his esoteric writing continues to reach a wide audience while he continues breaking ground in alternative journalism, public speaking, illustration, and photography. Brad Olsen, I need an hour just to go through your impressive resume. Welcome back, my friend. How are you?
Hey, Richard, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on. We always have such wonderful conversations, and this one will not let your listeners down either.
All right, and you're joining us from the legendary ranch in Nevada. I got a little tour just before we started recording. It's a beautiful spread, I guess, as they say. So let's begin with the Secrets of Antarctica TV show that you produced and directed, and well, you did it all back in 2023. First of all, how do we watch it?
Yeah, that's available on Forbidden Knowledge TV. Forbidden is spelled with the number 4. It's Billy Carson's network. He's growing it to be another pay-per-view service, sort of like a Gaia TV. In fact, they're going public right now. They're raising funds to really expand it. So I was asked to do my Secrets of Antarctica a couple of years ago by Billy, and I wrote and starred in it, worked with a production crew last summer in Florida, where Billy's based out of. He hired a production crew, very professional group to do it. Melissa Tittle, in fact, who came from Gaia TV, put that all together. And it's great. It came out towards the beginning of this year, and it's doing very well. Billy told me it's one of his top shows. And we're even in discussion about doing season 2. So I'll have to dig deep into the files to find more material for that.
Fantastic. We spoke on Coast not too long ago. You were in South America just preparing to cross over to the Antarctic. I'm trying to remember, when was that? Was that 2022, 2021?
Well, gosh, when I was about to head over to Antarctica, that was a little over 5 years ago. That was actually the fall of 2018. Actually, it was December 21st, and we had to ask our Airbnb host in Bariloche, no less, of a place, which is the infamous Nazi hideout, if we could do a coast-to-coast at 5 a.m., and he was very gracious, sat up and listened the whole time. He was a native Spanish speaker, but I think he got enough out of it. And you were such a great host that day, Richard. And then only a few weeks later, we were getting on a sailboat to cross the Drake's Passage down to the Palmer Peninsula in Antarctica.
I cannot believe it's been 5 years. Oh, my gosh. More than 5 years. So I want to begin with, I was putting together this month's Inner Sanctum newsletter, and it's all about the Antarctic. And you've been on with me before. We've talked about some of the mysteries of the Antarctic, but I want to begin with the Admiral Byrd, the secret diary, and purportedly that he flew his plane over this, while he was flying over the Antarctic, all of a sudden he saw this verdant, beautiful green area with wildlife and so forth, and basically had flown into the inner Earth, an opening in the inner Earth. What do you make of the Byrd diary?
I have read the whole thing, and I quote from it extensively. It's quite a fascinating account because he, absolute historic fact, was the first aviator to fly over the South Pole. He discovered it by air a few decades after Amundsen, the Norwegian, and the Scott party 35 days later reached it by land. So he flew over it. And if there is a giant hole under the ice, he would have seen it on that flight in the 1920s. Well, the diary is dated, time-stamped and dated in 1946, the famous year of Operation High Jump. And historically, he was definitely the head of that fleet. But the interesting thing about that diary, Richard, is he says it's the Arctic. Now, is that a typo, or is that a way to throw people off? Or does he always mean the Antarctic? But it was definitely published after his death. And this was according to his son, who was given the diary and asked to publish it posthumously, which he did. The son did. And kept it as is. So it said that they were flying the Arctic. It was the dates right around the end of 1946 when he was definitely in Antarctica for Operation High Jump. And it's also a known historic fact that he did fly to the South Pole again from Little America, the base that he helped set up. And there were 3 hours of missing time on his flight that day that they recorded in Little America. And he only went with his radio man. And according to the diary, they go into this verdant green valley, as you describe. And one of the first things they see, they misidentified as an elephant. Later on, they flew closer and saw it was a woolly mammoth, an extinct mega fauna and mega flora on the ground there. Well, as we've talked about previously in our interviews on Antarctica, it is the most volcanically active continent. So there are geothermal features that could melt great big domes under the ice. It's quite foreseeable that he could have flown into one of these. Now, could there be life down there, including woolly mammoths? That seems like a far stretch. But the story goes on, and then shortly after they see the woolly mammoth, they lose control of the plane and also lose contact with the base. So they're wondering what's going on, but the plane is still flying and the instruments are still under remote control. All of a sudden, 2 UFOs come wingtip to wingtip. Admiral Byrd describes them as flugelrods, these flying discs. And then all of a sudden on the speaker comes a Germanic voice that says, "You are in good hands, Admiral. We will be landing in the domain shortly. Just relax." And they touch down, but first they see this magnificent city. Best way I could describe it, the way he writes about it in the diary, it's kind of like the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz. And they land in the domain of the Ariani. And Admiral Byrd wrote that on the Flugelrod were insignias of Nazi Germany. And when the pilots came out, they're tall, blonde guys with Germanic accents. And they said, "You have been summoned to meet with the master." The radio man stayed behind, and so did the other pilots. And Admiral Byrd had an audience with the master, who warned him on the dangers of nuclear war. Because this is 1946, it's only a year after Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they were saying, "You're a very well admired admiral. We'd like you to go back to the Pentagon and tell your superiors not to play around with these weapons and to disarm what you have and put an end to this madness. Well, we know in history that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. But Admiral Byrd flew out of there the same way he came. And the last thing he heard from the pilots when they regained his ability to fly was Auf Wiedersehen, said goodbye in German to him. And then back to little America they went. But what's interesting, Richard, from the diary is those dates are right when they get down to Antarctica with the Operation High Jump. And Admiral Byrd, being a military man as he was, had to follow his orders. His orders were to go to the New Schwabenland base and confront the Germans on the surface area there, which they did. But it was a very one-sided battle, and these Flugelrods came up out of the water and could have easily taken out the whole armada of ships, but just in a show of force took out all the planes and sank one of the ships. And that made Admiral Byrd leave Antarctica 2 months into 6-month expedition called Operation High Jump.
And officially, Operation High Jump was like a scientific expedition, but right. The actual purpose was to invade this Nazi base that the Germans had established in the Antarctic in New Schwabenland, as early as the 1930s?
Well, that's when they went down there in the late 1930s under the direction of Hermann Göring, who was the head of the Luftwaffe, the air command of Germany, before the war began. And they flew around this area and dropped these 2-meter long, not bombs, but they kind of flew down like bombs with an insignia to demark their land claim, which was already claimed by the Norwegians and known as Queen Maud Land. It's basically the portion of Antarctica directly south from South Africa, which, by the way, during World War II, they were sympathetic to the Nazis and were allowing them to refuel and resupply before the U-boats and other ships were heading down to the land claim in New Schwabenland. Well, Richard, I'm looking at maps 5 and 6 years ago before my trip down there, and I'm finding Cold War era maps of Antarctica from the early 1980s. And I was surprised to see that the Germans never left New Schwabenland. In fact, they're still there to this day. They have several bases in that same land claim of Antarctica.
The rumors of Hitler surviving the Fuhrer bunker, and I mean, I don't think there's much doubt now that that was not his body that was taken by the Soviets. I think even the Soviets confirmed the DNA; it was a female. But the legend that he was spirited out of Berlin, taken on a submarine down to a base in New Schwabenland, and then from there perhaps on to Argentina. Any evidence that you've come across to suggest that he was taken there and then on to Argentina?
Yeah, quite a bit of evidence, Richard. First of all, there are documents in the FBI archive stating that he would be most likely found at certain locations in Argentina or Colombia or Chile. A lot of those countries were sympathetic to the Nazi cause, and many of them were propped up with fascist governments like Pinochet in Chile. And around the time of World War II, Perón government in Argentina was very sympathetic. So I went to this town near Cordoba, Argentina, Cordoba being the second largest city outside of Buenos Aires. And it was an industrial hub. It could have really taken off and been the economic powerhouse, but there was so much corruption in government, kind of like Ferdinand Marcos government in the Philippines. They just siphoned so much money for themselves. They didn't use it for infrastructure development. But there's a little town above Cordoba called La Falda. And I went there, and there is a place called the Eden Hotel that Hitler visited pre-war, and they were sympathetic to the cause. When I rolled in there, Richard, it was like going to a little barbarian town in Germany. There are signs where you could get Wiener Schnitzel for lunch or strudel for dessert, and all the architecture looked like Germany. So I went and did the tour of the Eden Hotel. And fortunately, the tour guide, he could speak English quite well because my Spanish is not very good. And at the end of the tour, I said, do you really think that Hitler survived and actually came here? He goes, oh, I don't have to think. I know. I said, well, how do you know? He said, just right here in town, there's an elderly woman who was the chambermaid in the Eden Hotel when she was a teenager. And she has gone on record and even taken a lie detector test that she saw Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, his wife, and even their German Shepherd dog, Blondie, survived and came to the Eden Hotel. And what they did to keep him alive and move him around was they set up all these safe houses everywhere. So that's a tidbit of evidence, but also in Bariloche, where we did coast to coast, I went and looked as close as I could get to the Inalco house, which is right on the lake there. And there was a great History Channel series called Hunting Hitler. And while I couldn't get close enough to see the house, I could see the bay where it was on. They went in on the water and went ashore, and they found the seaplane garage. So if the authorities were moving in on him at the Inalco house, they could just quickly shepherd him into the seaplane and then fly over the crest of the Andes Mountains right into fascist Chile. So they always had a way to escape. But I think they brokered a deal with the U.S. after the 1952 flyover in Washington, D.C., when it was the Antarctica Nazis flying their Flugerods in a show of force saying, look, we can fly over your most sensitive airspace and you can't do anything about it. So Truman panicked. He was still the president in his last few months and wrote basically surrender treaty with the Antarctic Nazis. And Laura Eisenhower, in her new book, Awakening the Truth Frequency, has whistleblower testimony and also information from her own family that said her great-grandfather, Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he became president a couple months later, he was handed a raw deal. He was not happy about that. You mean he was the supreme commander in Europe? He fought the Nazis and saw so much carnage, and now the previous president surrendered to them? So this kind of set off in motion this whole idea that there was a third force the whole time, this Fourth Reich set up in South America and operating more of as an intelligence agency, but still holding quite a bit of power and money. So Martin Bormann, the money man, he kept popping up all over South America in the 1950s. At the end of the war, he was the number 2 to Adolf Hitler. So it's very conceivable that many of the top Nazis, including Hitler himself, survived World War II, faked their own death, had doppelgangers if they needed them, so they could escape to South America. And I wouldn't be surprised if they even made a trip down to Base 211 in Antarctica.
All right, we'll take a quick time out. Brad Olsen talking Secrets of Antarctica right here on Strange Planet. Don't go away. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Brad Olsen is with us, world traveler, adventurer, author, speaker, and Secrets of Antarctica 2023 television program. Well, it came out earlier this year. Once again, how do we watch it?
You can watch Secrets of Antarctica on Forbidden Knowledge TV. It's spelled with the number 4, Bidden Knowledge. And just click on the Secrets of Antarctica link.
The military blockades rumored to be around the Antarctic, preventing real sort of independent scrutiny and investigation. First of all, is it true? Is it a thing? Did you encounter anything like that back in December of 2018 when you went down there?
So I got down to Ushuaia, Argentina in December, and originally we were told, "Oh, you can't get on a cruise ship till February. You're kind of boxed out," and that was kind of the end of the trip, anyways. And inquiring a little bit deeper, there was one travel agent that said, "Well, have you considered going on a private sailboat?" And I said, "Oh, I love sailing. My dad used to own a sailboat. We used to sail around the British Virgin Islands and the Caribbean. I've got some experience on sailboats." And they said, "Don't go to the pier where all the cruise ships go in Ushuaia. Go to the yacht harbor and start inquiring." And that's what we did. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we just started asking around. And sure enough, we found a boat that was leaving in January called the Chief One. It was a Polish vessel based out of Gdansk, Poland, and it was their maiden voyage.
Wow.
And so we had a captain who had never sailed to Antarctica before, and actually kind of made a little blunder by taking us into the tail end of a storm on the Drake Passage, where 3/4 of us got violently ill from seasickness. I think I lost about 25 pounds on that trip. But to answer your question about a blockade, no, there's no such thing. Certainly on the Palmer Peninsula, this is the very heavily traveled tourist area because this is where all the cruise ships go and where our sailboat went. And we saw other sailboats too. There's no blockade. It's so big down there. I don't see how they could possibly prevent ships from going in there because there would be so many ways to sneak in. But the fact is, we had to go to the Argentinian Navy station in Ushuaia and submit an itinerary, show them all our passports. They took photocopies of them. And then we went to the customs house the day before we set sail, and we got stamped out of Argentina after being stamped in when we went down to Tierra del Fuego. So this is kind of a weird little quirk. For 26 days, I was in no man's land because when we got back from the trip, we got stamped back into Argentina. But for those 26 days, we were nowhere because Antarctica is owned by no one. It's basically a wilderness, a biosphere preserve protected by the Antarctica Treaty and owned by all nations. So the whole notion that Antarctica is forbidden or an ice wall or you can't go there, that's just not true.
What do you make of the all of these Google Earth images of, well, there's supposedly an ancient civilization, remnants of an ancient civilization kind of emerging from the ice, Hyperborea. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm utterly fascinated with all the accounts, and fortunately, in the position I'm in, I'm working on another book on esoteric Antarctica. So I follow through with all these links people send me and the GPS coordinates and go look at it myself, including one that I got sent from Dr. Michael Sala, who's also an Antarctica researcher, a very credible Google Earth image of what looks like perfect rectangle foundations for a city. And lo and behold, it just happens to be right there in the New Schwabenland German claim of the 1930s. So I think there's pretty good evidence that there is some kind of, is it a lost civilization or is it a newer civilization? Are we looking at maybe some buildings that got bombed out or abandoned after Operation High Jump? It's kind of hard to tell. They're not super high resolution, but what we can see is the perfect grid of what looks like a city. And I take that as a pretty good tell that there's something down there that's not being discussed because Mother Nature does not create perfect grid city rectangles and squares and streets just by chance.
Well, where does the name Hyperborea come from? I mean, is there a lot of research into this supposed ancient civilization?
Yeah, there is. Well, Hyperborea was this mythical land at the two poles. And this ties into the legend of the Aryan race that the Nazis were utterly fascinated with their own origins. And that origin leads them to this mythical land called Hyperborea, where there are underground inner earth cities of very advanced civilizations. So just like in Admiral Byrd's diary, going to see the master in the domain of the Ariani, that's also what they called themselves, that there could be these high-tech, very advanced, human-looking people that live at both of the poles. In the northern part, it's called Agartha. And one of my colleagues at the conferences, Brooks Agnew, has identified and has the GPS coordinates for the other hole in the North Pole. It's about at the very top of the big island right next to Greenland. Is that
Baffin
Ellsworth Island?
Could be, yeah. Ellesmere or Baffin Island, yeah.
Yes, correct. The very northern extremity. And that would give the Earth a torus field. If there's a hole in the ice in Antarctica and a hole in northern Baffinland, then the energy flows in and out like a torus on this planet Earth. And presumably the Nazis found both because they also had bases in northern Greenland and Baffin Island and in the Arctic region itself. So they were very well versed with this. And they sent out expedition parties also to the Tibetan Plateau, where they were looking for Shangri-La and some of those mythical cities that are said to exist below Tibet.
The Piri Reis map, which dates back to what, the 1500s?
Yeah, 1513.
Yeah, I mean, does it not show the Antarctica without ice?
Correct, and with animals living in it. Kind of like what Admiral Byrd saw, megafauna, megaflora. And what's interesting about the Piri Reis map is that it shows some islands which are now buried under ice in the Larsen ice shelf and also the Ross ice shelf. But the Piri Reis map shows the Larsen ice shelf, A and B, which are currently under a half a mile of ice. And under that ice are a series of islands which have been discovered by sonar. But on the Piri Reis map, in the same location where those islands have been identified, there they are, free of ice. So the presumption is Piri Reis was working off of source maps that went way back. In fact, in the liner notes on the Piri Reis map, it even says that he was copying maps that went all the way back to the Library of Alexandria in Egypt and some from the Ptolemaic era of ancient Greece when they were charting out the known world. So this was a common practice among admirals such as Piri Reis and cartographers would be the first thing you would do when you captured a ship is you'd go into the captain's quarters and break into his lockbox and steal those maps. The maps were worth more than gold because the maps could be copied and they were very much protected information. So if you could get your enemy's maps, you've basically stolen their prized possession.
Speaking of islands, you mentioned islands a little earlier. There is an island off the coast of the sort of the mainland of Antarctica called Rothschild Island. Is that actually owned by the Rothschilds?
Yeah, well, it's named after them. Technically, nobody owns any land or island in Antarctica. Anything below the Antarctic Circle is part of this biosphere reserve. It actually extends above the Antarctic Circle to 60 degrees latitude south. Everything below that is protected. And there is Rothschild Island. There's also the Rockefeller Plateau that got these naming rights. And what's interesting about the Rothschild Island, I was also conferring with Dr. Michael Sala before my trip, because I knew pretty much the route I was going to be taking down the Palmer Peninsula, and said, do you know of any anomalous things down there? He said, well, yeah, Brad, if you can get to Rothschild Island, apparently they have some kind of high technology like a HARP array that they can affect weather patterns and stuff from there. Well, we didn't get close to Rothschild Island, not like we could go ashore and go exploring this place. I mean, the distances are very vast. That's why I always have to remind people. They said, oh, why didn't you go to that pyramid in the Ellsworth mountain range? It's like, well, it's not that easy. You got a mountain expedition to do those kind of things.
We'll take another time out. We'll come back and we'll discuss further. I'd like to find out, I mean, if money was no object, where would you go in the Antarctic specifically? What would you investigate? We'll come back. Brad Olsen stays with us. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Back with Brad Olsen, adventurer, world traveler, award-winning author. He's got his Esoteric Series, Modern Esoteric, Future Esoteric, Beyond Esoteric, and you're working on a 4th to do with the Antarctic.
That's right.
All right. And we also have Secrets of Antarctica, the television show. Again, that's Forbidden Knowledge TV, and then it's spelled with the number 4, Forbidden Knowledge TV. So if money wasn't an object, and you could, take a helicopter and land wherever you wanted to land, and you had supplies and all the resources you need and a crew, where would you go if you only had a limited amount of time? Where would you go in the Antarctic? What do you want to know about?
Well, you read my mind, Richard, because I'm already putting this plan together with a venture capital company called VC Cross, and they are seeking to raise 10 million. I think that could be enough to mount this expedition. We've already started an LLC corporation, which you do for any documentary or TV show, and opened a bank account as well. We already have one VC company willing to match funds. We're trying to get to the $10 million goal. And I have a adventure travel company based out of Puentes Arenas, Chile, who does expeditions, custom expeditions. I went into their office in Chile, and they have another office in Salt Lake City that I went to talk to them about doing such a trip. And the first location that I would go to are these pyramids that I mentioned in the Ellsworth Range. And I know about them, they know about them. And when I was showing them all my pictures of anomalies in Antarctica, I showed him the pyramids. I said, what do you think of that? And he said, well, yeah, we've seen that. We fly over it all the time. Mm-hmm. We call it a nun attack, which just means an attractive mountain poking through the ice. And I said, well, did you ever land there? Did you ever climb it or take a sample? Could you tell if it was man-made or natural? No, we just fly over it and point it out to our clients. Most of their clients are going to climb the tallest mountain in Antarctica called Vinson Massif. So if you've climbed Everest and Kilimanjaro, all the tallest mountains on each continent, well, to round out your bucket list, you got to go climb Vincent Massif. And that's what most people do. But they can also fly us to South Pole. Now, that's not to say that they were going to fly over the hole or go into the hole. That's actually a big no-fly zone on that portion side of the South Pole. But we could land there and perhaps do some investigation. On the way to going there, you cross over the Beardmore Glacier on the Trans-Antarctic Mountain Range. And this is where some of Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblowers have said they found one of the 3 massive crafts that have been known since the 1970s. And our intelligence agencies have nicknamed Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, like Columbus's original 3 ships. So I've actually talked to some remote viewers who are going to try to triangulate the location of this big black basalt octagonal shaped craft at the lower part of the Beardmore Glacier and see if we can find it. And I had dinner with Linda Moulton Howe after the Conscious Life Expo or it was a Sedona conference in March. And she's very much willing to help out in any way. In fact, she'd love to go as well. But I told her, Linda, it's very tough travel. And she's getting up there in age. So she's like, yeah, I know. I just want to see it. So, well, let's see how the fundraising goes. But to just finalize your answer, where else would I go? Well, I would go to New Schwabenland, too. And I know where the Base 211 was located in an area called the Schumacher Hills, which is very close to the Schumacher Ponds, which are these lakes that never freeze because they're heated with geothermal energy. So just to cruise around there and get some of the locations on film would be fascinating. But if we were to find anything, for example, did Eisenhower get revenge on New Schwabenland and nuke it during Operation Argus, which was this top secret, still to this day, nuclear bomb testing? And I write about this in my book, Beyond Esoteric. If we were to go down there with Geiger counters and find that Antarctica actually got nuked, that would be historic. That would be very groundbreaking. And the history we've been told is not the history that actually happened.
Well, which leads me to my next question. And as you say, that would change everything we think we know about not only history, but current events and who's really running things and so forth. Why would they allow you to go down there and poke around like that, whoever they are?
Well, we're just hoping it will be the zeitgeist, the spirit of the ages, and that disclosure is imminent. A group like us who are honest investigators that just want to get to the bottom of it. Linda Moulton Howe told me you'll have to get permission through the National Science Foundation. So of course, we have to do everything legally by the book. No sneaking around. There's no way you could do that anyways. And hopefully it's just the time when disclosure is ready to happen. And I've said this many times, Richard, disclosure could very well come out of Antarctica. One of these 3 Nina, Pinta, or Santa Maria ships, credible UFO sightings or base, the hole under the ice. I mean, there's so many things we've heard about, or an ancient civilization. What if these pyramids did turn out to be manufactured? That's a game changer right there. So perhaps by doing this documentary, we'd have the opportunity to show the evidence.
What's happening down there right now, do you think? You said that it's rumored that Eisenhower nuked New Schwabenland as revenge. I mean, based on what I've learned from Laura Eisenhower, this Nazi ET alliance is still in place. Are they still operating from New Schwabenland? Have they moved their base of operation? What do you think is happening down there right now?
Well, there's a couple things. For one, they probably left before they got nuked. There was stories that the scientists that all came down, and by the way, thousands went missing right after World War II. And to keep the scientists from being too lonely, they also captured thousands of Ukrainian women at the end of World War II to go down there because they were also considered blonde hair, blue eye, master race type women. And they didn't like it down there. Nobody liked it. And so they knew that they had these micronations in South America, which by all estimations still exist to this day. And they operate outside the purview of the host country of Chile, Argentina, and Brazil. And they probably left before the 1958 nuking of New Schwabenland, Project Argus, because it's very inhospitable. And the story was that anytime a U-boat resupply vessel would show up, if one person just had the sniffles, just a slight cold, because no viruses can exist outside in the cold, they would show up at these bases and infect everybody, and they'd all get sick, and they didn't like it, and they rarely saw the light of day. So they largely left, is my understanding, by 1958. However, they went through with the nuking just to put an end cap on it. But there were still other enclaves in Antarctica, most especially down in this domain of the Ariani. And I think that's what the New Berlin base was. So there were two very distinct bases that were spoken of during the time of the Third Reich. They said New Schwabenland was base 211, but then they also had this impregnable fortress for the Fuhrer in a domain of ice, according to Admiral Dolitz, who was the head of the U-boat fleet in 1943, made that comment. And they called it New Berlin. So I think they renamed, or they gave their own name, New Berlin, to the domain of the Ariani, which wasn't their city, but they were able to co-opt a position there. But this is really interesting, Richard. When I was talking to Linda Moulton Howe, and I've heard this from other researchers too, that just a couple years ago, right in the dead of winter down in Antarctica, there was a huge influx of German-speaking military-aged men leaving Antarctica through McMurdo. That they, no questions asked, just get us out of here. We don't want to be here. First plane out, get us going. So that they made their way to McMurdo, which is operating all year round, just to get out of there. So something has happened in recent times that perhaps the underground network is being dismantled, and they lost their Mach 2 speed subway tunnel that leads to South America. Perhaps they couldn't get out by plane or boat any other way, and they were just in a desperate situation to get out through McMurdo.
What are your plans in terms of going back? Anytime soon?
Well, it could be as soon as this next upcoming season, which is mid-November until mid-March. If we get the funding to do the documentary, and if the travel group can book our trip, I could be going back as soon as the end of this year.
And that would be for season 2 of Secrets of Antarctica for Forbidden Knowledge TV?
Well, we would certainly parlay some of the footage and information gleaned, but it would be for its own documentary that could be premiered in movie theaters. Man, just like when I write a book or publish another author's book, when I'm considering doing it, I'm always thinking, what would I value? What kind of book would I like to have on my own bookshelf? Same thing with a movie or documentary. What am I going to watch that's not going to be a waste of 2 hours of my time? So I want it to be really hard hitting and very filled with information that I would value, pay $20 to go see in a movie theater myself.
BradOlsen.com and CCCpublishing.com. And of course, the Esoteric Series, Future Esoteric, Modern Esoteric, and Beyond Esoteric. Terrific talking to you, Brad. Thank you so much for this, as always. We'll talk again soon, I hope.
Always a pleasure, Richard. Thanks for having me on again. And yeah, we'll have to book an interview right before I head back down to Antarctica next time around.
Can't wait. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Hey there, and welcome to yet another installment of Strange Planet. On this episode, near-life experiences and shared death experiences. But first, just a friendly reminder, if you'd like to get a little deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber, and it's real easy to do. Just click on the link in the episode notes, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You gain access to commercial-free listening, special bonus episodes, 2 per month, that are produced exclusively for premium subscribers, and you receive my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. All right, we are going to speak with an emergency physician who spent 25 years in a major trauma center caring for the most severely ill and injured patients. Sometimes when patients didn't survive, Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll saw their souls leave their bodies, and he communicated with them before they left this realm. He says he exists to help souls heal. Dr. Jeff, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
I'm well. It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
The new book is Not Yet, Near-Life Experiences and Lessons Learned. Before we get into that, let's start with your otherworldly experiences began in childhood. Tell me about your brother, that horrible farm accident, and what started to happen to you after his passing.
Well, I didn't really appreciate what started to happen to me until I viewed it in retrospect many years later. But after I wrote my book, people started to ask me about my experiences and when and how did they start. And with some introspection, I concluded they began about the time of my 12th birthday when my brother tipped the tractor over and it took his life. We were really close. And it was after that I started to have experiences. For example, when I was just starting to drive a car, I was driving much too fast late at night in the dark on a windy country road, 2 friends in the car, none of us wearing seatbelts. And suddenly a voice spoke to me and said, "You have to slow down." I was in a really rebellious time of my life. I wouldn't have listened to an authority figure or my parents, or I've joked that if God had been sitting in the seat next to me, I wouldn't have listened to him. But this voice just wrapped itself around me, and I slowed down. I went around the corner, hit a car head on. There was a lot of damage, but nobody was injured. I think if I hadn't have slowed down that night, if I hadn't have heard the voice, I think I might have died that night. And it wasn't until 20 years after my brother's death that he came to me and he said, "You have to go talk with our mother. There's things she's never told you about the day I died." And that got my attention. I went and I visited with my mother, and she told me for the very first time that day, she said, "I always knew where you were in the house before Stan died because I could hear you singing. When your brother died, you stopped singing." And that was the first time I realized that his death had a real impact on me and the rest of my life.
Wow. Has he appeared to you since?
Yes, I've had a few experiences with him. One of which uh, happened about 10 years ago. I was in meditation, and he came to me in my meditation, and he touched my hand. And when he touched my hand, the room and the building I was in just faded away, and all of a sudden I was in this profoundly beautiful, glorious place that I think many would describe as heaven. And he led me around, he gave me a tour, and then he showed me my life in review. And he showed me how on certain days when my life had changed its trajectory dramatically, how he had intervened on my behalf on those occasions. And then he showed me the day he died, but he didn't show it to me from the perspective of a 12-year-old boy like I'd always experienced it previously. He showed it to me from the perspective of my parents. And I experienced all the grief and sorrow and sadness, the anger, the loneliness, the heartbreak. And then he looked at me and he said, "Go tell our parents not to be sad anymore. Tell them I'm okay and I want them to be happy when they talk about."
What did he look like?
What did he look like? He looked just like he did when I knew him as a young man, when he was just before his 16th birthday when he died. And he didn't look 16. He looked like an adult, but he appeared to be in the prime of his life, and he still was in a physical. He wasn't in a physical body, but he still had a physical form to my eyes. And just he was profoundly happy and filled with light.
Did those experiences, did they predate your career as an emergency physician, and did they influence your decision to get into medicine?
The experiences started when I was a teenager. So they had been going on for years before I decided to become a doctor. And no, they didn't have anything to do with me deciding to be a doctor. When I was about a junior in college, I was walking across campus with a friend of mine whose dad was a physician. He'd known his whole life he was going to be a doctor. And I didn't know that. I asked him, I said, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" And he just said, "I'm going to be a doctor." Just so matter of fact, like it was a fait accompli. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll try that. That was my decision to become a doctor.
So just tell us, what is kind of I imagine every day is different, obviously, but talk to me about a typical day as an emergency physician inside a major trauma center.
Being a level 1 trauma center, we had the very sickest and most severely injured patients brought into us from all over the state and from surrounding states. And we also had residents and interns and students in our emergency department because it was a teaching hospital. And there's a whole team of people that work together, particularly when you have severely injured patients, a trauma team. And so I'll give you one example of something that happened to me with regards to a trauma. We got word via the radio or telephone of an inbound trauma patient that had been involved in a horrible car crash 200 miles away. He had been extracted from the car. He was badly injured. His wife and his 14-month-old son died at the scene. His 7-year-old son was minimally injured. They'd taken him to a local hospital, done what they could for him, and flew him to the trauma center where I work. I wasn't going to go in and see him because there was another physician. There was a whole trauma team ready to take care of him, but a nurse came and grabbed me by the arm and said, "You have to come." When I got down to the trauma room, everybody was taking care of this unconscious man, and I walked in, and his deceased wife, whose physical remains were still 200 miles away, was standing in the air above the gurney. And she looked at me, and she expressed her profound gratitude for the care her husband was receiving. And I walked over and looked down at the man, and I checked the pulse in his foot because he had a badly injured leg and ultimately ended up losing the leg. And I remember thinking he's going to lose the leg. And as I looked down at him, I could still see his wife standing in the air behind me because I could see in all directions at the same time. It was as if the whole room got quiet, like you're watching TV and somebody turns the sound off. Everybody else was doing all of their tasks, and I didn't have any assigned tasks. I wasn't his doctor. I was just in the room. And so there was this profound communication between me and his wife, and this whole shifting of priorities. You recognize what's really important in your life. And there was this profound peace and calmness and light about it. We patched him up, sent him up to the OR or the ICU. I don't remember which. And I pulled off my shoe covers and went back out into the rest of the department and finished my shift. And that was a typical kind of an example of some of the experiences I had in the ER.
The nurse that took you into there and said, you have to come see this, and you weren't the attending physician, who was she? I mean, that sounds like some kind of an intervention.
Yes, it was. In fact, she was the only other person in the department that knew I had these kind of experiences, because she had them too, and she pried them out of me once. She persuaded me to share some of my experiences. And so when she came and started yanking on my arm, she says, you have to come. And I said, I don't need to go. And she said, no, she's there. You have to come. And when she said, I said, who are you talking about? And she said, his wife, she's there. And then I knew what she was talking about, because she saw her too. She had the same experience I did. And about a month later, after this patient had had many surgeries, including the amputation of his leg, this same nurse came and grabbed me by the arm, and I kind of shook her off and said, I don't like it when you, what do you need? What do you want now? And she said, we have to go tell him what happened. His name was Jeff. And I'm not disclosing any confidences, because he's talked about his experience publicly. She said, we have to go tell him what we experienced, which we did. We went to his hospital room, and when he heard what I had experienced, what the two of us had experienced, he became emotional and felt empowered to tell us about his experience at the scene of the accident. While he was still trapped in the car, he left his body and he rose up in the air above the scene of the accident in this inexplicable light. And he met his wife, Tamara, who told him, you have to go back and raise our other son. And he shared a profound death experience before re-entering his body. And we're still friends today.
Wow. Why do you suppose you get to see these things, experience these things, your former colleague, the nurse at the hospital, as well, and not others?
I have no meaningful answer for that. The short answer is I don't know. I don't have a clue. I have learned that there are things we can do that make us more open to have such experiences. We can be willing. We can be trusting. We can be open to it rather than skeptical. We can believe other people when they talk about their experiences. There are things that make us more open to have these experiences, but some people have them and some people don't, and it's a spectrum.
So let's get some definitions out of the way here. Most of us, probably all of my listeners, are familiar with NDEs, near-death experiences, and I think your patient Jeff experienced one of those at the scene of the accident. But what is a near-life experience?
Near-life experience is a term I coined when I was writing my book. And the reason I used that term was because every near-death experiencer I've ever spoken with, and I've spoken with a bunch, Eben Alexander and Mary Neal are friends of mine, and I've heard their experiences in great detail. Every person that has a near-death experience, to my knowledge, talks about it being the most real thing they ever had in their life, that they were closer to their ultimate life purpose, that they were more alive and more awake and more alert. Their faculties were heightened. during that time. And to me, it seemed like calling it a near-death experience diminished it in some ways, because what it really was, it was a near-life experience. It was a reaching into our greatest potential experience. And that's why I use that term, near-life experience.
And the shared death experience. I have some familiarity with that term and the experience, but give me your definition and your experiences with shared death experiences.
Shared death experiences is a term used to describe people that are in proximity to someone when they die. Maybe chronologic proximity, maybe geographic proximity, maybe emotional proximity. And the person having the shared death experience is usually awake, alert, healthy. And yet when a person dies, sometimes they escort that person into the next realm, or they have some profound through the veil experience, very much like a near-death experience, except for they're perfectly awake and alert. They haven't suffered any injury or illness. And these are noteworthy in some ways because many mechanisms have been proposed to explain near-death experiences, physiologic mechanisms like brain anoxia and neurotransmitter dumping, temporal lobe seizures. You've heard all of these and many other explanations. None of them, when you study it, holds up to scientific scrutiny, but people still cling to those explanations. Nobody has proposed an explanation for shared death experiences because I was in the middle of a busy shift as an emergency physician. I had never used I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't on medications. I'd never had a seizure, still haven't had a seizure. I certainly didn't have brain anoxia. So there's no physiologic explanation for shared death experiences as a general rule. Raymond Moody, who's been studying near-death experiences for 50 years, wrote a best-selling book that's sold 13 million copies, called me up one day. And he said, Jeff, I've been a skeptical, objective researcher for over 40 years. And although I write about near-death experiences, I harbored doubts that there was such thing as an afterlife. He said, after I read your experience and the experience of Jeff Olsen, is the other Jeff, and read your book, he said, I finally relinquished my doubts. I now believe that there is indeed an afterlife. I thought, wow, well, that's pretty good.
I'll say. Yes, you turned the great, legendary Raymond Moody into a believer. That's quite an honor. We'll take a quick time out. Dr. Jeff stays with us. Not yet. Near-life experiences and lessons learned. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Jeff O'Driscoll, MD, the author of Not Yet, Near-Life Experiences and Lessons Learned, and a novel, Zen's Garden. We were talking about the shared death experience. What have you seen as an emergency physician with regards to shared death experiences?
Well, I'll give you another example. I walked into work one day to start my shift. I was logging onto the computer when I became aware of a presence over my shoulder. I'd had enough experience by then. I intuitively knew that the presence I was feeling over my shoulder was the essence or the consciousness of the person around the corner in the resuscitation room with a team of doctors and other providers trying to resuscitate her. She was intubated. She was unconscious. They were doing chest compressions, and yet her consciousness, her soul, if you will, was standing next to me and asked if I would help her, which I found rather striking. I stopped what I was doing. I walked around the corner into the resuscitation room. Again, I had absolutely no responsibility for this patient. There was another doctor in there in charge, and everything was happening the way it should happen. But I had on scrubs and a white coat. I might have been the department chair at the time. It was not uncommon to walk in for another physician to walk into a room when a code's going on like that. So nobody paid any attention to me. I walked over and I rested my hand on this woman's leg while they were still doing chest compressions and bag ventilating her. Mm-hmm. And I'd learned that touch is very important in some of these circumstances. When I touched her leg, she rose up out of her body. And she asked me, she said, "Is it okay for me to leave?" And I wondered, why would you ask me that question? But from some eternal place, this answer came through me, and I silently communicated it back to her. Mind you, no one else in the room knew what was going on. She was unconscious. She had a tube in her throat. And I said, if you think it's time to go and you feel that this is the right thing for you to do, I think it's probably okay. And I misspoke. This was the communication we had before she rose up out of her body. At the moment I said that, she rose up out of her body. She stood in the air above the gurney. She had this almost physical appearance about her, but she appeared to be in the prime of her existence, like half the age of the body she'd just come out of. She filled the room with light and love, but nobody seemed to be aware of it except me. And then she thanked me for what I'd done, which seemed so insignificant to me. And then she left. And as I was leaving the room, I heard the doctor in charge pronounce her death in military time. And I thought, yeah, I know, I saw her leave. And I walked out and logged onto the computer, and that's how my day began.
How do you retain your composure when something like that happens? I mean, if someone were to look at your face while this is happening, surely there would be, I don't know, astonishment or something registering on your face. How do you remain so composed and calm and no one else knows what's happening to you?
I guess a lot of it is practice. As you become more comfortable with it, you know at the outset that other people aren't experiencing it. And so you don't feel inclined to have a demonstration to call attention to yourself, because then you'd have an unpleasant or uncomfortable conversation trying to explain what's going on, and you'd be met with skepticism. And so by the time I got to the emergency department as a physician, I'd had enough experiences in my life that they felt normal and natural to me. And you hear a lot of controversy about the conflict between science and spirit. For me, they always felt complementary. In medical school, I learned about the physical body, how to take care of it, what could go wrong. And I learned all the physical, medical, physiologic stuff. But none of that precludes the notion of a spiritual essence that inhabits the body. The de facto model for consciousness is that it's created by the brain. Mm-hmm. The human brain creates consciousness, and the consciousness ceases with physical death. That was Eben Alexander was a respected neurosurgeon in the Harvard medical system, and later had his own near-death experience. He had a bad meningitis and was not expected to live. And he was a pure materialist who thought that consciousness was created by the brain. After his profound near-death experience, which was written in a New York Times bestseller, he came to believe that consciousness exists in spite of the brain, not because of it. and that the brain actually acts as a filter to help us exist in this realm despite the capacity of our consciousness to reach elsewhere.
Why do you suppose everyone doesn't experience either an NDE or a shared, a near life experience or a shared death experience?
I can't say why everybody doesn't experience it. I have a few ideas. For example, I have clients now. I do personal intuitive mentoring with people, and I have clients in a dozen countries around the world. And as an example, one woman whose son had passed away, I asked her one day in a session if she'd experienced her son's, had any experiences with her son since he died. And she said, "Oh, no, I don't see things." And she was adamant about that. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Have you had any experiences with your son?" And she goes, "No, and I don't hear those kind of things like some people do." And I thought, okay, that's good. So I rephrased my question and I said, "Have you felt your son's presence since he died?" And she goes, "Oh, yes. Yes, I felt him nearby." I said, "Was he okay?" She goes, "Yes, he's in a good place. I know he's happy." I said, "Did you feel his love?" She said, "Yes, that's how I knew who he was." And I paused and I said, "Okay, let's try this. Now, next time you talk about your son and things, try using language like this. Try saying, 'My son loved me so much, he came to me and made his presence known and communicated to me that he was okay, and he let me feel his love.'" I said, "Is that an accurate representation of what happened?" She goes, "Yeah." You see, we have this language of what we don't experience, that we diminish what we do. She got the message very clearly. It just wasn't in the words that she expected. And what I teach people is that in this life, so much of what we communicate is in what we see and what we hear. And so much of the communication of spirit or soul is what you feel and what you know, even if you can't explain how you know it. And so you'll hear near-death experiencers frequently talk about how they might only hear a few words from somebody, some divine being or deceased loved one or what have you, but they get this flood of knowledge and understanding that comes with those few words, and they get volumes of download instantaneously. And that is, much of that is spirit communication that we need to be more sensitive to.
People that have had a near-life experience and then come back into their body, do you have experiences with those patients? Are they angry they're back? How does it transform their lives? Does it always transform their lives?
I think it virtually always transforms their lives. From my research and the many people I've spoken with, it's a transformative experience. I don't know if I've met anybody that was angry about coming back. Many of them say that they wanted to stay. Mm-hmm. Many of them, perhaps most of them, say they were given a choice. You can stay here or you can go back. And so I think most of them come back in a transformed manner and live with a higher purpose in their life. And for many, the experience opens some window, if you will, that never fully closes, and they often have profoundly spiritual experiences intermittently for the rest of their lives.
I've been told it can be very difficult on the family, though. When it can split families apart. I mean, if someone has had that profound experience, their life is never the same, and maybe in some ways, their husband, wife, partner, they don't recognize that person anymore.
Yeah, so often they come back so changed that they struggle to maintain their job. They struggle to maintain a long-standing relationship. And a lot of the time, it seems, it's because their priorities have shifted so much. The things in this life seem to matter so little that it's hard to be motivated to pursue the things that used to motivate them. And a lot of times they view other souls with so much compassion, they just can't hardly interact with society because you just want to give and make things right. And that's a pretty hard way to have a sustained existence in our current realm.
Do you counsel people who've had near-death or near-life experiences and that are struggling? And if so, what do you tell them?
I have a few clients who have had near-death experiences, and sometimes they do struggle. It's really hard to counsel people, except for I operate on the basis and the assumption that everybody has their own answers. Sometimes they need help finding them. Sometimes they need help accepting them and acting upon them. But I function on the premise that you have your own answer. And in fact, when people ask me how I work, I tell them I bring people to their aha moment. I ask them the right questions until they have a realization of, they stop and pause and go, oh, okay, I get it now. Yes, okay. But I didn't give them the answer. I just led them to where they found their own answer, because everybody has the capacity to get their own answers. And if you conclude that the voice you're listening to is your own, it's still divine. Listen to it, follow it.
Dr. Jeff, we'll take a quick time out, back with more of our conversation right after these. Financial experts thought we were in the clear. They were anticipating around 6 rate cuts by the Fed this year. And then the inflation data came out, higher than expected. Friends, this isn't going away. It can't. The U.S. is $34 trillion in the hole, and yet we keep printing more money, pushing up the prices we pay every day even higher. So you can either stick your head in the sand, or you can do something about it. Diversify a portion of your savings in gold with Birch Gold Group. Gold is your hedge against inflation, and Birch Gold makes it easy to own. They'll help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold, and you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Go to birchgold.com/strange and get your free info kit on gold. Then, talk to a precious metals specialist on how to protect your savings from persistent inflation with gold. That's birchgold.com/strange. Jeff O'Driscoll, MD. Dr. Jeff, the book is Not Yet: Near-Life Experiences and Lessons Learned. You've retired from your work as an emergency physician, but do you still have experiences with shared death experiences and near-life experiences? Do you witness these now?
Yes, I still do. As a matter of fact, you mentioned earlier in the program my new novel titled Zen's Garden. I wrote that over the last few years, and it was all written and edited when my father's health took a turn for the worst last April, a year ago. I set the book aside. I went and cared for my father for about 6 weeks until he passed away. And then a week after his funeral, my 32-year-old daughter was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And I was about halfway through last summer helping her to receive the medical care that could be offered when I remembered the book sitting on my...
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.
computer about an emergency physician whose adult daughter died.
Oh.
And my jaw just dropped open. I couldn't believe it. And I'd been struggling for a title for the book. I had a working title for a couple of years while I was writing it. And I thought it was about the main character. His name was Solace Murphy, an emergency physician. It's an Irish name. But the title didn't feel quite right. His daughter, who died, was named Zen. And he had experiences with her after she passed. And a couple days after my own daughter passed away in November, I remembered the book, and I thought maybe I should get that published because it was all written and edited. And I thought about the title, and I heard my daughter's voice say, Zen's Garden. And I thought, oh, that's the perfect title. The book isn't about Solace's journey. It's about Zen's tutelage. Her dad was her garden. She was working, cultivating in him. And I put that title on the book and published it just last month. And I had an experience with my own daughter, a profound experience where she came back to me and spoke to me.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, both of them, your father and your daughter. How are you?
I'm doing well. I have a profound peace about my daughter's passing, even the timing of it. I cry some days because I miss her so much, but I know it's okay where she's at. I don't have any questions about that. My father was an elderly man. He'd had a full and rich life. He had health issues that had limited his world in unpleasant ways. And so his passing was not traumatic, but it was hard to watch my daughter slowly succumb to cancer. And I'm so grateful that she, it was a month or two after she passed. I was laying on my bed one beautiful morning. The sun was streaming through the open door into the bedroom. My wife was somewhere else in the house. And my daughter just walked into the room. And during the last months of her life, she'd had her hair up in a bun all the time because the cancer made her overheat all the time, and it was hard for her to not be uncomfortable. But when she walked through the bedroom door, her long auburn hair was down over her shoulders, the way I remembered it for much of her life. In fact, she had this brilliant signature smile, and it reminded me of the day she got married. That was the image that I had. And she didn't say anything for a minute, and I finally silently asked her, I said, do you have a message for me? And she said, I love you, Dad. I'll always love you. So, yeah, I continue to have experiences and meaningful, profound ways.
The parallel between your own life and the book, Zen's Garden, which was written before your daughter passed away, before she got sick. How do you explain that?
I have to think that somehow my soul must have had some warning signs, because I remember a couple of years ago, I was writing this scene where Solace was talking to his wife about their daughter Zen. And he was just overcome with grief and love and sadness. And he said, God, I love that child. And I remember when I wrote that line, I broke down and cried because I felt it so deeply. And I remember wondering, why am I feeling this so deeply, as if it were my own daughter? And like I say, halfway through last summer, I remembered that line, and I thought about my own daughter, who was now had cancer. And I just remember thinking, wow, maybe that's why I felt it so deeply. Maybe my soul knew.
So where is your daughter now, do you think?
I think my daughter is in a glorious, wonderful existence. I think that she's with my father and her grandparents and her dear friend that died in high school and really had a deep impact on my daughter Rachel when her friend died. I think that they're together again. She has friends and family that are there, and I think that she's enjoying their company.
And I mean, what happens in the afterlife? Do you believe in reincarnation, or is that heaven, paradise, where they live for all eternity? What do you think happens?
Whether we call it reincarnation or something else, I think sometimes we get tangled up in the words. I believe personally that our soul or our essence is eternal, that it existed long before birth, that we existed in a spiritual realm, that we were born spiritually, if you will, and that when we enter this life and inhabit these bodies, that were born again into a physical realm. And I personally feel that in the next life, we're born into a new existence and we continue to learn and grow. And there may be future births beyond that. Think of it this way. This is kind of the way I think of it. Imagine yourself in a big room. It's kind of gray and not very bright in there. It's not dark. You can see what's going on. It's filled with people. And on your left, there's a big, heavy, dark curtain, and the same on the right. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, somebody draws the curtain back on the left, and this brilliant light and glory floods the room, and a soul walks in and joins you. And that's birth. And every once in a while, somebody on the right side of the room draws the curtain back, and it's this glory and light floods the room again for a few moments, and somebody exits, and that's death. And if you're close to the curtain, when it pulls back, when it's drawn back, you might get to peer inside for a few seconds. You might even see someone you recognize before it closes again. And in my mind, that is a shared death experience in a metaphorical way. I think there's some kind of a veil of some sort that separates us from our pre-Earth existence and from our post-mortal existence, and we pass through those veils at appropriate times and move on with our progress.
What do you hope people will take away from Not Yet? What do you hope they'll learn?
I hope they'll learn that everything's fine. Everything's okay. You're good enough. You're divine. You're on a path that you're learning what you're supposed to be learning, and that there's nothing to be sad about with regards to death, except one thing. It really sucks to miss the people you loved for a while when they die, and you long for that day when you're reunited, but death itself is nothing to be afraid of.
How do we get a copy of Not Yet?
Both of my books and my first novel, for that matter, are all available on Amazon. Not Yet and Zen's Garden are available on Amazon. They're also available on my website, jeffodriscoll.com. They're only available domestically. I only ship domestically, but you can get them internationally on Amazon. And my website, you can always find that Helping Souls Heal, if you don't want to remember how to spell my name.
Helping Souls Heal, and that link is in the episode notes. Who Buried Achilles? That was your debut novel. What's that about, very quickly?
That's actually about a spiritual journey of sorts as well. It's about a man who grew up with a very abusive alcoholic father he was a very broken soul as he approached adulthood. In fact, he wanted to take his father's life. He wanted to answer death upon his father for the way he'd been brought up. And he finally meets his father on a train platform in France. The whole novel's set in Europe. I wrote it when I was traveling in Europe for several weeks. I wrote much of it. And then his father starts to speak, and he learns things about his father he never knew, and it changes his whole life. And it's a transformational journey for him.
Dr. Jeff, great to meet you. Thank you so much for this.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.